Let's look at some modern day sovereignty issues and how sovereignty is being redefined in very tangible ways and causing some conflict and some cooperation in today's world. So we already said there's about 192, 193 current sovereign states in today's world. Why am I unsure of this? 192, 193, am I just too lazy to go wiki it? No. There's definitely 192, but number 193 is on its way, and that is East Timor. It's located in the Indonesian archipelago. It's already submitted its application. The check is in the mail. All the countries of the world have pretty much agreed to it. They will be the next sovereign state. They just have to jump through a few more hoops at the UN and do a few more things. And that could be happening at any given time now. So 192, 193 sovereign states. But do be aware, there are another dozen or 24 areas on planet Earth that have nations of peoples within them that may or may not be actively trying to become sovereign states either now or in the very near future. I'm just going to break them down by rough classifications here of my own way of thinking. There are some places that have a serious chance of achieving sovereign state status in your lifetime. I'm thinking mostly here of Palestine. Palestine is an area over there kind of in Israel. Israel kind of occupies part of it. And Palestine and Israel have been working on again, off again on a two-state solution for Palestine to become a full-fledged sovereign state in the world. Palestine already has about 100 other sovereign states which recognize its independence, so that will probably happen. It's not going to be not messy. It's going to have conflict and consternation still yet to come, but it will probably happen in your lifetime. Another place which will probably become a state even sooner is Greenland. I know, who knew? And a lot of people already thought Greenland was a state, but it is actually a colony of Denmark. It's an old territorial holdout from the colonial days. And it's probably going to peacefully become a independent sovereign state because the Danish government has kind of said, hey, we think we're going to kind of cut these dudes loose. We don't want to be seen as an old school colonial power, and there's been an independence movement within Greenland. That will probably come to pass too in the next decade. B, there are some places that have movements within them for independence and sovereignty in the future, but are not really hot and heavy. There's no real action right this second in that direction. And some examples of this would be Scotland. The Scots, the Scottish, a strong identity of nation. And a lot of people, again, think that Scotland's already a nation state. It's not. It's part of the United Kingdom. But there are some folks in Scotland who say, hell, I thought we already were a sovereign state. We should be a sovereign state again like we were back in the good old days. And there are movements for Scottish independence. Again, it's not, nobody's blowing anything up or anything crazy, but there's been talk about it, speculation. You'll probably see that come back up again. A better example is Quebec. The Quebecois in Canada. Yeah, it's French-speaking, French culture in Quebec, Canada. They have had actual referendums in the past whether to vote themselves independent, and they've been very close votes. It's not really hot and heavy right this second, but it will probably come up again in the very near future. C, there are some places that have a very active movements for independence within them, as evidenced by outright declarations of independence, petitions for independence, outcry by the people, rebel groups or terrorist groups who are out fighting for the actual independence cause and blowing shit up in places. And examples of this would be Chechnya in Russia. Chechnya is a little province, a little territory in the Caucasus Mountains that's been trying to get independent for about a decade. The Russians have had an ongoing war with them for over a decade now. And the Chechen terrorist groups actually blow up stuff in Moscow all the time. This happens once or twice or 3 times a year. Another movement is the Basque in northern Spain, the Basque ethnic group who's been trying to get a separate Basque country for some time in Spain. The government of Spain's had to put them down, try to negotiate them out of doing that. Another one you've never heard of, Transnistria in Moldova. Yeah, you've never even heard of Moldova, much less Transnistria trying to tear away, become a separate state. And of course, the Kurds, which I've referenced several times already, wanting to form their own Kurdistan from perhaps sections of lots of other states in the Middle East. They've been fighting for 100, 200 years for a separate Kurdistan. And yes, they have active terrorist/rebel groups working for them as well in different places. D, finally, there are some places that cause all sorts of international consternation because they have pitted international powers against one another in their battle to gain independence and sovereignty. but they logically could never actually gain sovereignty by today's rules, because in each one of their cases, there is a veto-wielding member of the permanent UN Security Council who would block and veto any United Nations resolution to officially recognize that little territory. Even though there may be a whole bunch of other states that recognize that little territory, if one of that P5 says we're not going to do it, then blocked. It's not going to happen. And these are the tricky, sticky situations that we need to know about to understand today's world of conflict right now. And I'm thinking primarily here of Taiwan, Kosovo, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia. Some of these we've already referenced in the past. We'll start with Taiwan. It's actually the easiest one. Taiwan is a little island off the coast of southeast China, has for 60 years, off and on, had independence movement, petitioned for independence. At one point, it may have had 60 or 70 or 80 different countries which actually recognized its independence. But China is on the Permanent Security Council, and China will veto any movement that the UN would have towards officially recognizing Taiwanese independence and Taiwanese sovereignty. It can never, ever happen by today's rules. Now, this one is actually kind of chilling out a little bit, because as things have progressed here in the last 20 years and China has gotten more and more powerful, the Taiwanese issue has kind of slowly started to slide away. Fewer and fewer and fewer countries want to ruffle the feathers of a ginormo China by recognizing independent Taiwan. So whereas Taiwan used to have dozens and dozens and dozens of supporters and people who recognize, it's down to about 23 countries only, and they're very minor countries. The U.S. itself shifted, and we used to recognize Taiwanese sovereignty and independence, but we've said, no, actually, that's between you and China to sort out. We don't want to piss off the big boy, so you guys figure it out. It's up to you. But we do not, the U.S. does not recognize Taiwanese sovereignty, and fewer countries do. The likelihood is that nobody will here in the next decade, and it will be folded back into the Chinese realm. Kosovo is an entirely different matter, which is going to cause some contentious issues in the future. We've talked about this one already in the last lecture. The backstory: Kosovo, this little province within sovereign state Serbia. This mess gets hot when the former Yugoslavia starts to crumble and implode back in the early 1990s, and it becomes Yugoslavia turns into a 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and 6 independent sovereign states, of which Serbia is kind of the remnant core of what's left of Yugoslavia. And it was the Serbs, the ethnic Serbs, which may or may not have been conducting acts of genocide in Bosnia, that got the U.S. and NATO involved in that mess in 1995. But of much more consequence for our story is when the U.S. and NATO got involved in Serbia directly in 1999. When Slobodan Milosevic, the then president of Serbia and a Serb himself, and most of the government was Serb and most of the military was Serb, it was claimed that Slobodan Milosevic was picking on, harassing, otherwise intimidating, beating up, or conducting genocide against the Kosovar Albanians in this little province called Kosovo. Again, Kosovo inside of sovereign state Serbia. Nobody is disputing that. This got so bad that people thought, hey, there's a genocide occurring right here in Europe. We can't let this happen. The U.S. and NATO went in and bombed the sweet bejesus out of Serbia to convince them to stop picking on the Kosovar Albanians, and then officially went ahead and took over Kosovo, that is. When NATO troops rolled into Kosovo, and subsequently the UN came in and administered the Kosovo whole province for a decade, both the UN and NATO said, hey, we're just here to stabilize the situation. We're here to protect this ethnic minority from being picked on and beat up by the Serb majority. That's what we're here for. We just stopped the genocide. We're just chilling things out. But of course, Serbia was furious. Oh, well, first off, they just got the hell bombed out of them. Who wouldn't be mad about that? But they said, hey, you're trying to rip away part of our sovereign state and make an independent state. More furious than them were the Russians, a Serbian ally, huh? And the Russians were like, "Niet! This is terrible! What are you doing? You cannot go into a sovereign state and carve it out for this little ethnic minority and then make an independent state. And the U.S. and NATO and the UN said, oh, no. Oh, would you guys relax? You silly Russian tricks are for kids. We're not trying to make a new state here. We're simply protecting this ethnic minority. We're just going to hang out, let's say, for about a decade till things simmer down and the war all chills out, and then these guys can figure out how to get their state back together again. That's all we're here for. Yeah, until that decade was up, and that was just in 2008. Come February 2008, everybody looks around and says, hey, NATO guys, what should we do now? Are we ready to leave? And the UN folks were saying, hey, is it time for us to go? I mean, it's been a decade. Everything's kind of chill, so we should leave. I mean, what's going to happen? What's Kosovo going to do? What are the Kosovo Albanians want to do? And the Kosovo Albanians answered the question for them. They said, we declare independence! Yay! We declare unilaterally that we're an independent sovereign state. And the United States recognized them, and then France recognized, and the UK recognized, and Germany recognized, and a whole bunch of European countries recognized. In fact, 69 countries in total recognized Kosovo. And the Serbs are like, what the hell just happened? And the Russians were, WTF! You guys are liars. You told us 10 years ago that you weren't going to do this, that you weren't going to carve out a separate sovereign state for this ethnic minority. You guys lied to us. And the U.S. and NATO and the UN were like, oh, well, we really didn't lie that much. I mean, we were just protecting them. They did that on their own. And then we instantaneously recognized, oh, this is actually kind of important for the sovereignty story, because this radically changed the equation, and it still is in today's world, because all those countries recognized, and it set a precedent which a bunch of countries really don't dig. And you can tell the countries that don't dig it by the ones who do not recognize Kosovo independence. Who did not recognize? Well, obviously Serbia said, BS, that's part of our sovereign state territory. This is against international law. You can't even do this. It's illegal, which is kind of true. So Serbia said no, Russia said niet, and guess what? Russia's on the Permanent Security Council, so they can veto anything that comes across the board to try to grant full-on state sovereignty status to Kosovo. It's a dead issue. It can never happen. So Serbia, Russia, most importantly, actually, China. China, number one fan of sovereignty. Yes, they are. Write that down. Number one fan of sovereignty is China. They looked at this and said, whoa, what the hell? This is terrible, terrible, terrible precedent you guys have set. You have now carved out a new country for a small vocal group of an ethnic minority within a sovereign state. We've all agreed to the rules, and you guys just broke them. And where will it end? You have just now said, if this ethnic minority wants to be a sovereign state, we're going to help them. Where will that end? You're not going to have to do that for every ethnic group across planet Earth. There's going to be like 1 trillion countries soon if you keep doing it this way. And China is the number one fan of sovereignty because they don't want anybody messing with their sovereignty, particularly because they have small ethnic minorities who may be petitioning for independence in their state, namely the Tibetans. Oh, you ever seen your Free Tibet bumper sticker? Yeah, rip that off. The Chinese ain't never going to allow that to happen. They also have other ethnic minorities in other parts of China who may be petitioning for independence. And they have the Taiwan issue. So the Chinese say, we ain't never recognizing no ethnic minority in another sovereign state because we expect that none of you people are going to recognize any ethnic minorities in our territory if they try to pull off to be a sovereign state. Do you understand that? So China, huge fan of sovereignty. But this is not just a Chinese-Russian thing. It's not just China and Russia versus the West. I said the U.S. and most European countries recognized Kosovo independence. Not all. And one of particular note I want you to know was Spain. Spain said, no, we actually cannot recognize Kosovo independence. Why would that be? That's right. For those of you that immediately, ching, light bulb went off and you said, because of the Basque issue in Spain, give yourself a Spanish glass of sherry. You're exactly right. The Spanish government said, we cannot recognize a small ethnic minority in Serbia as an independent sovereign state, because if we do that, what the hell are we supposed to say to the Basque people who are asking for the same thing in our sovereign state? it sets a bad precedent. Spain and China and Russia all said, this sets a terrible precedent, the Chinese in particular. They say, where will this end? If you're going to do this all over planet Earth, and every single small ethnic minority in every sovereign state who claims they want their own independence, you're going to give them all? Just like Kosovo, you're going to let them all go? We're going to have like 10 trillion freaking countries in the world soon. So there are several powers, major powers, and lots of others who say, no, we don't dig this concept at all. This is unraveling sovereignty. And these sovereignty tensions got even higher in the same year when the Russian-Georgian war broke out and the Russian invasion of Georgia broke out in August of 2008. What's up with that? Well, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but the primer for it is that Georgia, a sovereign state which pulled away from the Soviet Union back in 1991 and became independent, also had some small ethnic minorities in little territories who perhaps didn't want to be part of Georgia when it became independent, namely the Abkhazians in Abkhazia and the Ossetians in South Ossetia. Yeah, starting to get the picture here. And these groups were, since the inception of Georgia, petitioning to be independent themselves. They said, no, we don't want to be part of Georgia. We're Ossetian, not Georgian. We don't like them. They pick on us. They hate us. They're going to commit genocide or some other act against us. We don't like it. In fact, they hated the Georgians so much, they invited Russian military in as peacekeepers. So there's been Russian military there hanging out, protecting the small ethnic minorities in Ossetia and Abkhazia for years. And then suddenly, something happened in August 2008. Somebody threw a rock or fired a rifle at a Russian military dude in Ossetia, and all hell broke loose. The Russian military invaded within minutes. Surprise, surprise. Everybody was kind of prepped for this. Everyone who followed the situation knew what was going on. The Russians were well prepared for this. They invaded fully in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, crushed the Georgian military, actually invaded into Georgia proper, and then retracted back and have carved off these two little enclaves, and a couple months later said, you know what? We recognize the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which Abkhazia and South Ossetia had declared independence. And Russia said, yeah, we recognize them. And the West was like, the United States and the European countries were like, wow, what the hell just happened there? That's BS. Russia, what are you doing? You're breaking all the international rules. You cannot go into a sovereign state under the guise of protecting a small ethnic minority and then have your military come in and then carve it off and then declare independence and then recognize them. You guys can't do that. And Russia said, oh, really? We can't? You mean we can't do what you guys did in Kosovo? Oh, Russian smack down. Exactamundo, Ruskies. Talk about an international tit for tat. Woo! We may get 3 new states out of this mess. Let's back it up, though, and look at who are the true biggest sovereignty supporters in today's world. China, number 1, with no reservations. Even though China and Russia are typically tight allies, the Chinese would not even support Russia during this South Ossetia Abkhazia nonsense. They say, nope, we didn't recognize Kosovo. We're not recognizing either of those two for the same reasons. Hey, China's got the Tibetan issue. China has other ethnic minorities who may be pulling away. China's got Taiwan. They are not recognizing no one because they say no one's going to recognize any of these ethnic minorities in our territory. We can promise you that. So China, number 1 fan of sovereignty. Russia actually historically used to be the biggest fan of sovereignty as well, because it has the whole Chechnya issue, and in the Caucasus area there's also lots of other small ethnic enclaves like Dagestan and lots of other places that may be calling for independence soon based on ethnic differences between them and the Russians. So they have historically said, no, we're a big fan of state sovereignty as well, trumping all. And really, you could look at Spain for the same reasons. They are a fan of state sovereignty because of the Basque thing. Hell, really, any country on planet Earth that has small ethnic minorities in it that are currently or maybe in the future are going to petition to become their own sovereign independent state, any of those states are fan of the current system as is. They like it. And also states that just really don't want to be messed with by international institutions at large. They're big fans of state sovereignty trumping all too. And I'm thinking of places like Sudan, where a genocide might be occurring, Burma, where the dictatorship is smashing their own people, even Iran, North Korea. These countries are all about state sovereignty because they don't want the UN or anybody else treading on their soil or messing with them, even if they're doing horrific stuff to their own peoples. But internationalism really pushes back against the state sovereignty supremacy idea. First, by introducing the human rights bills and anti-genocide measures at the formation of the UN back in the 1940s. Right on up into the mid to late 1990s, when it started to become acceptable for international military intervention into sovereign states to remedy injustices that were occurring solely within that state. Most of these we've talked about now. The U.S. and NATO in Bosnia, the U.S. and NATO in Kosovo and Serbia, the Rwandan issue, Liberia got invaded internationally, possibly Sudan in the future. With the possible future statehood of Kosovo, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia, these are real game changers on how all this stuff is going to work in the future. And sovereignty is also unraveling even further in our time right now with these worldwide planetary wars of ideology. And these are wars, not a state fighting a state invading a state. These are wars of ideas that are across the entire planet. And I'm thinking specifically of the war on drugs, and the war on terror, the war on terrorism. Those are ones that really are above the whole state borders, state territory, state sovereignty, state government thing. Fighting terrorism is a global thing. It's like fighting international crime and the mafia. Where do you stop? How could you stop if you're truly going to try to root out drugs or terrorism or the mafia? You can't stop at state borders. So this is being a game changer too, and the reason why the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. It was not really a state-to-state war. The U.S. is trying to get a small group of people within this sovereign state. So these things are changing the whole equation. Where will all of this lead? Are we working towards a universal set of values of human rights and liberties that will make state sovereignty concept completely obsolete, as an international organization could go in anytime to protect humans anywhere? Will the war against drugs or against terror or against international mafia redefine the acceptable rules of the global game of interventionism? Or will the sovereigntists like China fight back? And really, it's the state sovereigntist versus the internationalist. That is the battle that's unfolding in your lifetime. Which side of the fight will you be on? Well, that's up to you. I'm not here to preach or teach you to be on one side or the other. I'm talking about the ideas and what these competing things are going to bring to the future of current events, of state sovereignty, of international conflict and coalitions. Well, that's that for now. But let's test your newfound knowledge of sovereign places in the world with a little game I like to call State or Not a State.